ground trembled beneath their feet. The sky darkened with the shadow of massive wings, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of a creature born of fire and malice. From the icy reaches of the north to the fiery depths of Mordor, dragons have left a trail of destruction across the lands of Middle-earth, each dragon more fearsome than the last. But these colossal creatures, forged by the dark will of Morgoth, were not merely beasts but instruments of unparalleled devastation, bringing entire kingdoms to ruin with their wrath. So join me as we answer the burning question: who was the most destructive dragon of Middle-earth? Imagine the skies darkened by the vast wings of dragons, their roars echoing across the mountains. The winged dragons of Morgoth were some of the most formidable creatures in Tolkien's legendarium. These dragons were not only massive in size, but were equipped with the ability to fly, making them even more dangerous. First unleashed during the War of Wrath, the final battle of the First Age, these winged beasts added a terrifying new dimension to Morgoth's army. Their ability to rain fire from the skies caused untold destruction, decimating the forces of the Valar and their allies. Though less famous than individual dragons like Smaug or Ancalagon, the winged dragon's impact on the War of Wrath cannot be understated. They symbolize the culmination of Morgoth's experiments in creating the ultimate weapon of terror and destruction. In the frigid wastes of the north, beyond the grey mountains, lurked the cold drakes. Unlike their fiery brethren, the cold drakes lacked the ability to breathe fire, but this did not make them any less formidable. Their immense strength, armoured scales, and sharp claws made them devastating foes in their own right. The cold drakes played a significant role during the latter days of the Third Age. They were responsible for the sacking of many dwarven strongholds in the Grey Mountains, contributing to the decline of dwarven power in that region. Their attacks forced the dwarves to abandon many of their ancient halls, scattering their people and diminishing their influence. One notable cold drake was slain by Fram, the ancestors of the Rohirrim, but we'll get to that story later in the video. It will highlight not only the destructive nature of the cold drakes, but also their role in shaping the histories and conflicts of Middle-earth. Shifting gears from the great battles of Middle-earth to a more whimsical tale, we find Chrysophylax Dives, a dragon from Tolkien's lesser-known work, Farmer Giles of Ham. While not part of the central legendarium, Chrysophylax offers a unique perspective on the nature of dragons in Tolkien's broader writings. Chrysophylax is depicted as a cunning, yet somewhat cowardly dragon, known for his vast hoard of treasure and his reluctance to engage in unnecessary combat. Unlike the grand and epic dragons of the First and Third Ages, Chrysophylax operates in a smaller, more personal story, bringing destruction and greed to the quiet countryside. In Farmer Giles of Ham, Chrysophylax is ultimately outwitted by the titular character, Farmer Giles, who manages to best the dragon through cleverness rather than brute force. This tale, while lighter in tone, still captures the essence of dragons as greedy, destructive, yet ultimately fallible creatures. Chrysophylax's story reminds us that even in Tolkien's lighter works, dragons are forces to be reckoned with, capable of great destruction, but also of being outsmarted. Scatha the Worm was one of the great cold drakes, a creature of immense power and greed. Dwelling in the northern wastes beyond the Grey Mountains, Scatha became infamous for his hoard of treasure, which was said to be vast and coveted by many. His legacy, though perhaps less renowned than Smaug's, played a significant role in shaping the early history of Rohan. Scatha terrorized the northern regions, laying waste to lands and plundering treasures from the dwarves. His greed and cruelty were unmatched in the region, and his raids contributed to the decline of dwarven strongholds in the Grey Mountains. Scatha's reign of terror eventually drew the ire of Fram, a great chieftain of the Yothiod, the ancestors of the Rohirrim. In a tale of bravery and cunning, Fram managed to slay Scatha, a feat that cemented his legacy as a hero among his people. However, the victory over the dragon was not without its consequences. The dwarves, who had long suffered under Scatha's depredations, laid claim to the dragon's hoard. Fram's refusal to relinquish the treasure led to a bitter conflict, underscoring the destructive impact dragons had, not only through their might, but also through the greed and discord they sowed among their enemies. Scatha's legacy endured, with the treasure from his hoard later forming part of the wealth of Rohan. His story is a reminder of the dragon's dual nature, as mighty foes to be vanquished and as catalysts for greed and conflict among those who sought their riches. No dragon in Middle-earth's history is as well known or as widely feared as Smaug the Golden. His story is intricately tied to the fate of Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, and the fortunes of the dwarves of Durin's folk. Smaug's legacy is one of devastation, greed, and ultimately his own downfall at the hands of a simple yet courageous man. Smaug was a fire drake, a descendant of the great dragons of Morgoth, and he lived up to the terrible reputation of his kind. His destructive reign began when he attacked the Lonely Mountain, the thriving kingdom of Erebor. The dwarves under King Thror had amassed great wealth, including the Arkenstone, a jewel of unparalleled beauty. Drawn by the lure of this immense treasure, Smaug descended upon the mountain, laying waste to the kingdom and slaughtering many of its inhabitants. With Erebor under his control, Smaug established himself as the undisputed ruler of the mountain. His presence cast a shadow over the lands of Dale and the surrounding regions. The once thriving city of Dale was reduced to ruins, its people scattered and destitute. Smaug's greed and malice ensured that the treasures of Erebor remained untouched by any save himself, and his fiery breath turned any would-be challengers to ash. Smaug's story is famously chronicled in The Hobbit, where his reign of terror comes to an end. Bilbo Baggins, along with Thorin Oakenshield and his company of dwarves, embarked on a daring quest to reclaim Erebor. Bilbo's encounter with Smaug in the vast halls of the Lonely Mountain is one of the most iconic moments in Tolkien's works. The cunning hobbit managed to glean critical information about Smaug's one vulnerability, a bare patch on his otherwise impenetrable underbelly. This knowledge ultimately led to Smaug's demise. In a dramatic climax, Bard the Bowman of Laketown used a black arrow to strike Smaug in his weak spot as the dragon attacked the town. Smaug's death marked the end of his fiery reign, but not the end of his impact. The treasure he left behind became a source of strife among men, elves, and dwarves, echoing the destructive nature of dragons even in death. Smaug's story serves as a powerful narrative of greed, heroism, and the enduring consequences of a dragon's wrath. His destruction of Erebor and Dale left scars that would shape the destinies of many, making him one of the most infamous and feared dragons in Middle-earth's history. Ancalagon the Black is a name that inspires dread, even among the most seasoned lore masters of Middle-earth. He was the greatest of Morgoth's winged dragons, a being of immense size and unparalleled destructive power. Ancalagon's appearance marked a turning point in the War of Wrath, the final and most devastating battle of the First Age. Summoned by Morgoth in a last-ditch effort to stave off defeat, Ancalagon led the charge of the winged dragons against the forces of the Valar. The sky darkened with his coming, and his fiery breath scorched the lands. His sheer size and might were such that no mortal force could stand against him. However, the Valar had their own champion, Erendil, the Mariner, who sailed into battle aboard his ship, Vinkilot, bearing the light of a Silmaril. Erendil, along with the Great Eagles led by Thorondor, engaged Ancalagon in a titanic struggle that lasted a full day and night. The battle culminated in Ancalagon's defeat. He was cast down from the skies, his massive body crashing onto the peaks of Thangorodrim, destroying Morgoth's fortress and sealing the Dark Lord's fate. Ancalagon's death marked the end of the War of Wrath, but the devastation he wrought was immense. His brief but catastrophic appearance underscored the apocalyptic scale of Morgoth's final stand. Ancalagon remains one of the most awe-inspiring and fearsome creatures in Tolkien's legendarium, a symbol of the ultimate destructive potential of the dragon kind. Glaurung, known as the Father of Dragons, was the first of his kind, and the progenitor of all the dragons that followed. Unlike the winged dragons that came later, Glaurung was a wingless, fire-breathing behemoth. His cunning, malice, and sheer destructive power made him one of Morgoth's most trusted and deadly servants. Glaurung's first appearance came during the Dagor-Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, where he led Morgoth's forces in a devastating assault against the elves and their allies. His fiery breath and impenetrable scales made him a formidable opponent, but it was his mind that made him truly terrifying. Glaurung was a master of deceit and manipulation, using his intelligence and cunning to sow discord and despair among his enemies. One of Glaurung's most infamous acts was his role in the tragic tale of Túrin Turambar. Glaurung's malevolent influence manipulated Túrin into committing acts that led to the destruction of his family and the loss of everything he held dear. Glaurung's psychological torment of Túrin showcases his ability to inflict devastation not just through physical might, but through cunning and emotional manipulation. Glaurung's death came at the hands of Túrin, who, despite the dragon's mind games, managed to slay him with a well-placed blow to his vulnerable underbelly. However, the scars of Glaurung's influence lingered long after his demise, leaving a legacy of sorrow and ruin. Glaurung's story is foundational to the mythology of Middle-earth, setting the precedent for the terror and destruction that dragons would continue to bring. As the father of dragons, his legacy lives on in the fearsome deeds of those that followed in his wake, making him the most impactful and destructive dragon in Tolkien's world. Glaurung's death came at the hands of Túrin, who, despite the dragon's mind games, managed to slay him with a well-placed blow to his vulnerable underbelly. However, the scars of Glaurung's influence lingered long after his demise, leaving a legacy of sorrow and ruin. Glaurung's story is foundational to the mythology of Middle-earth, setting the precedent for the terror and destruction that dragons would continue to bring. As the father of dragons, his legacy lives on in the fearsome deeds of those that followed in his wake, making him the most impactful and destructive dragon in Tolkien's world. The dragons of Middle-earth embody the raw power and destructive potential that shaped the fate of lands and the free peoples. Their tales of fire and ruin, greed and terror continue to capture the imagination and remind us of the great themes of Tolkien's legendarium: the peril of unchecked power and the resilience of those who stand against it. If you enjoyed this story through the fiery depths of Middle-earth's history, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Stay tuned for more epic tales and unforgettable characters of Tolkien's world. Until next time, keep the spirit of Tolkien alive.